Let's get straight to the point with views from both sides of the aisle. We now welcome Austin Barber and Brandon Jones back to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and former Democratic member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Gentlemen, welcome back to At Issue.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
So let's start briefly. The State of the State was this week. A tone of I think shared vision coming from the governor, focusing on the things that I guess where his priorities align with legislative priorities. So Austin, I'll start with you. Did anything about this State of the State strike you as different or more compelling than previous states of the state? And what is kind of what is the modus operandi with this particular address?
Well, it's very clear the governor was trying to give a speech that was focused more on policy than politics. He said that in the very beginning, and I think the speech laid that out. Obviously, we've had some humongous, great news lately regarding, the economic development. I almost gave up mid sentence there. Sorry, Michael. It's not my day this morning. We've had some. I'm not having a stroke, Brandon. It's okay. We've had some really good news on the economic development front, and obviously that's the governor's.
Two huge special sessions is what you're.
Yeah, absolutely,
to, yeah.
And that's what the governor really wanted to talk a lot about. That's his number one priority is continuing to focus on recruiting new jobs, and part of that are all kinds of things: infrastructure investment, not just roads. Roads are a big part of this. Ports, railroads, airports, because as he said in his speech, Brandon, he said, listen, the faster that, our businesses in Mississippi can move products to market faster, the better it is for them. And we have to make it easier for private business in Mississippi to be able to do that. One of the big issues that the governor's been talking about for a while are capacity projects through the Mississippi Department of Transportation. These are roads that are beyond capacity. We see those in DeSoto County, Madison County, Jackson County, Harrison County, these places where we have too many trucks, too many cars, and not enough roads. There's a big focus on improving that, sending more dollars to MDOT so MDOT can widen our highways, widen I-55 in DeSoto County, widen I-55 in Madison County, and projects in Rankin and on the coast as well. So it's good. I really appreciate the governor talking about that because that really matters. And then lastly, he spent a lot of time continuing to talk about how do we improve on the Mississippi Miracle, which is, of course, the education turnaround we've seen in Mississippi. He specifically talked about let's come up with 12 new magnet schools around the state that would focus on math and engineering. And he even specifically said, let's use the Central High School, which is right across the street from here, as a shining example of how we can do that so these kids can be better prepared when they leave high school, go to college for obviously this tech industry. So it wasn't just 40,000 foot. He really got into some specifics, and I thought he did a good job.
What do you think?
Well, look, he did try to strike a conciliatory tone at the beginning of it. I think there were some of us who thought this sounds a little bit like gaslighting. We need to get the guy who wrote this speech to meet the guy who runs his social media accounts, and then they can both go meet the governor, and maybe we can get a little bit more of this kind of working together vibe going in terms of actual governance. Because, look, Governor Reeves has been a flamethrower. He has been a very tough political customer, and he's isolated a lot of people in that legislature. So I'm sure some of them are sitting there listening to this going, okay, but you also do tend to see that in lame duck terms. This is the last time he will be running for governor. And so all that's left is over the next 4 years is what's going to be the legacy of this governor. So hopefully
what he can get done.
That's right. What can he get done? There was a line in there that I thought was strange. It was like a combination of lines, and I wrote it down. We have a crisis of purpose and an abundant despair in America. Idleness is slowly killing us. The West is recognizing what we've lost. That was some of that. Y'all may remember George W. Bush taking in Donald Trump's inauguration speech when he was like, what in the world? That's kind of the feeling I had when I was hearing that. And there was some swipes at just the economy generally. I mean, guys, the U.S. economy has grown by 2%. The Fed is talking about dropping interest rates several times here in the coming months. Every economist has basically gotten off of their bad jobs reports and are saying that's heading in the right direction. So it was kind of there was a little bit of that contrast that I didn't fully get. But to all of Austin's points, there was an effort to dive in to places where there might be some areas to work together. So as critical as I may be of the governor, and as much as I may have found this a little bit out of character for him, I do appreciate any time that somebody tries to do the job and say, hey, I'm not going to be that person today. I'm going to try to be the person that can work with the legislature.
Yeah, I actually have the speech pulled up, and that is a very interesting line and lines that he gave. But what he was talking about, I did just look above that. He was talking about our workforce. He's like, look, we've got a strong workforce here in Mississippi. He says, we make fridge, we make fighter jets, we make cars, we sew cotton. We can do these things here. We no longer have to send all these types of jobs around the world. Let's do them right here in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So taking the tone of the speech and this focus on finding that common ground between what the governor's priorities are and what legislative priorities could be. I think it's clear what was also missing out of that, and I think not addressing probably what the largest kind of divergence between the legislature and the governor this session, when that's Medicaid expansion. He didn't bring it up. He focused on what common ground they could find. But the momentum for Medicaid expansion is growing this week. The House passed by a vote of 96-20, I believe, passed a form of expansion. So that train is rolling. The governor didn't address it in the state of the state, but where is this headed? We know at least we have a veto-proof supermajority in the House. Where is this headed, Brandon?
Well, if you take him at his word, it sounds like he was trying to, excise any subject that might be controversial from the speech. So maybe that was the effort. It's like, I'm not going to touch that because we don't agree on that.
It was.
Now I'm sure there were people sitting there, Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, for example, who has tied the expansion issue to workforce development and how it improves the workforce. So I'm sure he was thinking, well, it's a big ingredient. But yeah, I think that was probably intentional. And again, I know as a guy who has sat in that chamber before and listened to these, it's always nice when you have somebody giving a talk that's not trying to get your blood pressure through the roof. And so maybe that was just the idea here. Now with
not talking at you, talking to you.
I like that. And I mean, I was only there for Governor Barber speeches, and the guy could give a speech, and I had to respond to one of them. I was the response to the State of the State one time. But I always liked it a little bit better when you were getting, talked with, not at. Expansion, what we brought up last week, I don't think I would have ever predicted that after all these years of not having a bill, the bill comes out to the floor this week, Austin. There are no questions asked.
There's amendments offered.
No amendments offered, no debate, and the thing just comes flying out of there. I mean, credit to Misty McGee, credit to Jason White, credit to Robert Johnson,
minority leader,
credit to everybody over there in the House for talking about this and addressing it and coming out with a product that there seems to be some agreement on.
Well, and you've not been critical of the speaker. You've had questions about some things, and I'm glad to hear you say that the speaker deserves credit on this, because that is discipline. And again, he's less than 90 days into his first term, and this was a priority issue for him. And he had his folks in line. He was able to get the minority side in line as well. This was a big issue for them, and they worked very closely with him.
Well, we should say in terms of the legislative craft, that's not a small thing, because he's like 30 days into it, or maybe more now.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's
nearing 60, but still.
We've all witnessed what it looks like when everybody's not on the same page, and how easy it can be. You have a lot of people over there with their own ideas, so to get anything done in that manner takes.
Well, it was the same way in committee too. I was in the committee that Chairman Misty McGee held, and there was a few questions, not many questions. I think people understood the bill, understood the issue, of course, because we've been talking about this for more than a decade.
Right.
That helps.
And going into the session, I mean, the fact that both leaders came out prior to the session say this is something we're going to consider. I imagine going through the process that helps find some type of common ground within the committee process and getting it on the floor and getting it to where, because I'm sure there's optics in this too, right? If you're the speaker, if you're the minority leader, and having a bill go to the floor and it be like a resounding yes vote, that results in applause from the gallery, from even on the floor. I mean, there's an optics part of this, is there not?
Yeah, but I think it also goes to, several things. We mentioned Chairwoman McGee, her leadership on this issue. It takes a lot, and it's no small part of this process to talk to enough people in advance so that their concerns really are addressed, so that you get that. The applause doesn't happen if the conversations haven't taken place. And so what this gave us was a snapshot of what this chamber can be when it functions at its best. And so, we don't have a lot of these moments in this room when we're talking about Mississippi government. I kind of had a real warm feeling, Austin, thinking, now look, it's not perfect. You all heard me last week. I have some problems with this bill. But this is hundreds of thousands of Mississippians that are going to have access to coverage that they don't have right now. You cannot sneeze at that. And the fact that they didn't just talk about it, they actually went through the motion of putting together a substantive bill that has broad support across the aisle. That's just, hey, I'm critical when we have bad weeks. I got to be positive when we have good weeks. This was good.
Well, and Missy McGee, I've worked with her for years on hospital issues. She does her homework. She's always uber prepared. This is a big job for her to be chairperson of the Medicaid committee. For any person, she's taken the head on and obviously passed an enormous piece of legislation out of her committee on the floor. Also, very important to note that Trey Lamar, of course, chairman of Ways and Means, passed a big bill right after hers, which is taking the federal exchange and
creating a state exchange.
Creating a state exchange, which I should say, my friend Mike Chaney has wanted to do as our insurance commissioner for a long time. And Trey handled that bill with ease, and that's very important because I don't understand the funding part of it. Like literally, I don't know enough about it.
Right.
That was not a rhetorical. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but I need to get better educated on that. But obviously, what this does is this allows Mississippi to control the exchange, where private insurance. And the last time I talked about private insurance policies will be available to folks. I think he said from the 100% to 400% of the federal poverty level, but I need to get that details.
Austin likes that private insurance.
I do like private insurance.
I don't know what kind of experience you're having with your carriers, but I mean, hats off.
Well, we won't talk about specific carriers on the show.
Yeah, that's not.
I don't know who the
not.
advertisers are.
No,
yes.
Underwriters. This is public radio. We have underwriters.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And then keeping in the same vein, I mean, there is a piece to Medicaid expansion, not the broad bill that we've talked about, but there's a piece to Medicaid expansion headed to the governor. The Senate has passed presumptive eligibility, which will, and I believe that was a House bill that came over earlier in the session, if I'm not mistaken, or is it?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I'm not remembering that bill.
But
can we go to Brandon on that one?
But either way, I mean, there's another piece to this presumptive eligibility that is going to allow a low-income pregnant woman to get Medicaid benefits for prenatal care before having to go through the whole approved coverage.
Did that pass last year? Some version of that?
Well, no, we passed last year extending the period of care of coverage.
That was we extended post. That was extension of postpartum last year.
For a year.
This is presumptive eligibility. When women get pregnant, they don't have to wait to get through get approval through the Division of Medicaid before they can start receiving Medicaid benefits,
which is super important because listen, we need to keep these babies and these women as healthy as we possibly can. We want them to have all the best outcomes during pregnancy, all the best outcomes when these babies are born. And look, that's really important. And I always have to say this from a fiscal standpoint, it's important too because that's less hospital bills that either their insurance, if they're on Medicaid, that Medicaid would have to pay for. Most importantly, to keep those people healthy, the babies and the mothers.
Well, we've heard reports for years about the red tape involved with the administration of a lot of programs, but this program in particular has been wrought with challenges, and so this business of not having to go through that onboarding process, but just being presumed to be eligible, that's such a huge thing.
And getting care while the process, is completed.
That's right. And you think about the stress that is on people that are going through that process. Just take that off the table and just let them do what they need to do to get to that healthy delivery is big. So, look, we have to address those things. That's 2 bills in 2 successive years that get at it. First one with coverage and now with a presumption. That's good. Good stuff.
All right. I do want to pivot to corrections. We heard from the DOJ, the Department of Justice, yesterday that in addition to Parchman, 3 more Mississippi correctional facilities are under federal investigation. That's the Wilkinson County facility, Central Mississippi, and South Mississippi, all due to presumed violations of constitutional rights and liberties. So this is on the heels of Parchman. Burl Cain has, I think, been the commissioner of the Department of Corrections now for going on over 3 years. He inherited the Parchman investigation, but now we have new ones. What does this say about the state of corrections in Mississippi, Brandon?
Well, there are a lot of organizations who have been observing this for a long time, and what they have seen is very consistent with what the DOJ reports, which is these are dangerous places, that they're understaffed, that you have a problem retaining people to work in these places. And so it has been, and we've had horrific moments. I mean, I'm sure listeners will recall that a couple of years ago, Parchman was literally on fire. We've had too many people lose their lives, serving their time. We've had too many people who just live in constant fear. And you saw in the report the allusions to what happens in solitary and how dangerous that can be. It's on and on and on, and it's dehumanizing. And it's not from a moral standpoint. It's just a heartbreaking thing that we're not doing this job better. And these are 3 facilities. This is really, if you think about it, it covers almost everybody that's part of this system. Now, and I'm sure, Austin, you have something to say about that, and we can talk about the issue generally, but I think this conversation should increasingly be turned towards our over-incarceration of Mississippians. We are about 85% higher than the national average in terms of per capita numbers of people in prison. We have gone up over the last 25 years, something like 350%. I mean, we have an addiction to incarceration in this state, and we're not totally unusual in that, but I would like to see the legislature revisit some of Chairman Barnett's bills over in the Senate side that have to do with creating a reasonable and safe path to parole and thinking about what that looks like, because we have such a, lock them up, throw away the key way of approaching this issue that you can expect violence, you can expect difficulty retaining people to work in these places if you're not addressing the incarceration problem itself. And so I hope that we don't just look at this in terms of a bricks and mortar question, but we look at it in terms of what are we doing to create a reasonable pathway for people to reform their lives and reenter society.
Yeah. Well, so what is the central issue here then, Austin?
Well, it's pretty big, and I'm not an expert on it, but this is how I view this, and I'm trying to view this sort of from a government view of this, and what's the government's role into trying to fix this. And I mean, obviously, Department of Corrections is an executive branch agency that reports to the governor. I remember this early in Tate's first term. I don't even know if he had been sworn in yet, and there was this crisis going on at Parchman.
Right.
It was either December or January.
It was December into January.
And it was
his
sort of
inauguration.
And Michael, you remember this? It was an everyday story in name your news publication in Mississippi, and ultimately became a national story about the prisoners who were being murdered in prison. And this was a horrible situation, and one of the first, emergencies that Tate Reeves had to deal with. And I think he did a pretty good job of moving from the situation that we had then to where we are now. I'm certainly not saying things are perfect. I do look, and I wanted to just briefly read a half sentence in the statement that came from the Department of Corrections, and it says, this is in response to the DOJ report, We will work with the DOJ. Okay, we will work with the DOJ to identify possible resolutions to enhance inmate safety and continue ongoing efforts to improve operations at MDOC. It's very clear if you read this, if you talk to people in corrections, they are dealing with a lot of the same issues that private entities, public entities around the country are dealing with. Finding people that not only want to go to work, but work in this kind of environment and paying people enough money to want to go do that. I cannot imagine how difficult that job is, and I thank the Lord that we have people who are willing to do that. It's great for them, and I applaud them for those efforts. So Brandon can get into it on a much more deeper level, but I am looking, yes, it's obvious that there are issues there. We got to find enough people to want to go work, and how do we pay them adequately to get the best people that you can for those types of jobs. And good Lord, that's obviously a difficult situation that I'm sure it's not just Mississippi that's dealing with that, but I know we're only talking Mississippi.
When it comes to the violence and the staffing, I mean, is it like a chicken egg thing? I mean, are these places more dangerous because they're understaffed, or are they understaffed because no one wants to go there because they're too dangerous? I mean, like how do we get out of that cycle?
Can I answer this? How do I know?
Right.
Thankfully, I've never been to prison. I don't plan on going to prison. He might have a really good answer that's lots of. I wouldn't know how to answer that question.
We're over-incarcerated. We just simply are.
So
our knee-jerk answer has been to put people in prison, and we have to say, predominantly black men. We have a generation of black men in the state of Mississippi who are incarcerated.
The incarceration rate for black men far exceeds the incarceration rate for, I think,
by 2.5.
Yeah, I'm sorry, far exceeds the population of black Mississippians. It's.
And look, this isn't even a controversial thing. This is just a factual thing. This goes back decades, and it's not Mississippi alone. But there are some states who are more efficient than others in this. And so I think, again, let's re-examine kind of where we are in this stuff. It's been 10 years since House Bill 585 passed, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation that actually Governor Tate Reeves, who was then in the Senate, helped to get through.
He was lieutenant governor.
And that's right, yeah. in the Senate. And what was... There were several things that happened in that bill, but one of them was it meant that for technical violations, you weren't just having your sentence extended for years and years and years. We need to go back to looking at stuff like that. There needs to be more focus put on this parole board. This parole board bears some responsibility here, because there are people who are coming up before them who would pass muster in virtually any state, and they have taken such an aggressive posture on parole that it is just like banging your head up against a wall. I would like to see us with a parole board that understands carceral system a little bit better, and that appreciates that if we don't release the tension valve somewhere, you can't hire your way out of an over-incarceration problem. Okay. You can't build your way out of it. At some point, we just have to change our philosophy on having thousands of people live their entire life behind bars. And so I hope that this spurns not only a conversation about things on the ground, which are serious and people are living in that situation, but again, kind of look at the system as a whole. We've had several good bills that got really close. In fact, the governor vetoed 2123. I just remember that. Senate Bill 2123 from 2 or 3 sessions ago that came out of the Senate Corrections Committee. I hope this calls us back to stuff like that, because you're really going to just continue to kind of kick the can down the road until you address that question.
And that brings me to Parchman. Senator Juan Barnett, who is chair of corrections, I was also authored a bill. It's received some attention in committee, but it has been tabled. It's a bill to phase out Parchman, and there's some pieces in there that would secure employment for Parchman employees at another facility. It also includes a piece that would that calls for the state to acquire a private facility in Tallahatchie County, the Tutwiler Core Civic. Is this a path towards? It was. I think Senator Barnett said it's just a really old place. We know about the problems that DOJ has gone into. I mean, is this a path towards? I mean, this is a viable path. Looking at the Parchman and saying it's time to phase out of this facility.
I just go brief and let you go. You know this issue better than I do. I don't know, but I do know that we're starting to see some budget tightening as conversations around the Capitol, and so I don't know how much it would cost to build a new prison that would be able to hold the number of prisoners that you would need to hold that would have to be moved out of Parchment.
And to that point, I will say, I mean, right next door in Alabama, they just kind of went through this whole process with the DOJ too, and now they're facing, I think, a $1 billion price tag for a new prison.
I was thinking hundreds of millions. I didn't think billion. So I mean, those are questions that have got to be asked, and that have to be a big part of the plan that I'm sure Chairman Barnett is working on or thinking about. But we'll see where this legislation goes. That's an important issue.
Does the acquisition of a private facility, does that kind of fit the conservative fiscal approach, the fiscal conservative approach?
I don't know enough about that facility and what the cost would be to give you an accurate answer on that.
When Parchment took its star turn a few years ago, we all learned that place is run down. Yeah. And I mean, there's been numerous documentaries. If people don't know, you can check out one on.
Didn't early in Reeves's first term they spent tens of millions of dollars to get one of the areas of Parchment back at least up to standards.
Well, there have been closures of terrible units, but then we learned later not quite closures, and then there have been some refurbishments and attempts here and there, but then not quite to what. Look, it's been tough, and I understand.
Has it become a money pit in some ways? If we're talking about like tightening budgets and how much has gone into to try to.
I don't think either one of us are educated enough.
That's fine.
You can't have this many people in prison and it not be a money pit. Okay. It costs a ton of money to keep someone in prison. You think about the health care costs associated with having a 70-year-old man that committed his crime 50 years ago in prison. Think about that. Because you don't just let them die. Yeah. And so the price tag that's associated with these thousands upon thousands of people in these facilities, it's astronomical. And that's why I say you really can't build and spend your way out of this. It's just such a huge thing. And you mentioned a moment ago what's happening next door in Alabama. That's the thought that I had when you were asking this question. I hope we don't go down that path. I hope that we all don't move towards billion-dollar super prisons and just decide that we'll just build a big enough facility so that we could imprison everybody if we wanted to. And I know I sound like a broken record today, but again, we got to go back to sentencing laws and think about how long we're keeping people in and are we creating reasonable, safe paths to parole for people.
Yeah, and I know you would agree with me if that 70-year-old that you mentioned had been in prison for 50 years, or whatever your example was, if he's a murderer or a rapist, I don't want him to get out of jail. If that's what his sentence was, I don't want him to get out of jail. So that is not what you're saying. You're talking about we shouldn't have prisons filled with, I think, nonviolent prisoners and I know if we get into this conversation, we'll never end it. Yeah, but I'm sure we would find common agreement on.
Yeah, we have to look at it. I mean, it's just this is not totally unusual to us, although we're kind of at the top of the stack in terms of problems. DOJ's been doing this study, by the way, for a long time.
Yeah,
there have been watchdog groups that have been asking for their oversight. It's a black eye on the state. I think, we should say this is not a good review. This means you have a system that you're continuing to use and you're not doing it in a good way. You have to change something. And again, I hope it's not just a bricks and mortar conversation. We're not going to fix this problem with nicer prisons. We're going to fix this problem when we figure out what are we doing population-wise.
Well, and criminal justice reform was a big conversation, as you said, 8 to 10 years ago. So
let's bring it back.
Well, there certainly needs to be a review. Okay, what did we pass? What has happened? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Has it done nothing? But there are a lot of issues to discuss, and certainly you can make a case that we should be talking about this.
Well, and I think criminal justice is certainly something we can keep a look at as the legislative session continues. We got spirited toward the end. We'll end it there. This has been At Issue on MPB Think Radio, a weekly discussion about the 2024 Mississippi legislative session. If you can't catch us live each Friday at 6:30, At Issue can be streamed on demand on the MPB Public Media app, or subscribe to the At Issue podcast. Each week's podcast includes an extended version of our weekly interview, as well as an extended version of this roundtable discussion. And if you'd like to see what we all look like, the full interview and roundtable are available on YouTube. Just search Mississippi Public Broadcasting At Issue. I'm Michael Gidgey from all of us at MPB. Thanks for listening.